Okay, so it looks like the recording starts straight away. We've got some attendees joining. We'll just wait another 30 seconds or so to see if anybody else is coming in. Welcome to everyone as you're joining. You probably all noticed that everybody who's joining on mute. What we'll do is when we have questions at the end, I'll just ask everyone to raise their hand. So the raised hand symbol at the bottom of your screen, just click that, and then I'll know to come to you for any questions. Okay, so I think we will get started. So welcome everyone to the September CILT North America US chapter forum meeting. So for those of you in the US chapter, you know that we host a monthly meeting. Typically, I go through some news around CILT, and then we have a guest speaker. Now, this month we're a little bit different. I'm going to pass on the CILT news side. I'm going to give up the whole hour for today for our speaker. So I'm delighted to say that we have Jennifer Coutts Clay joining us. Many of you will know Jennifer. She is a member of the CILT, has been for a long time, based out of New York. Our plan today is we're going to talk about the topic of jetliner cabins, and specifically around changes and upgrades that take place within aircraft. What that entails, what are the challenges, why airlines do it, all of the questions that I think for all of us that use aircraft, we probably have in the back of our mind, but we've never had an expert on this topic that we can ask about it. So that's what we have today. One of the things that we're going to do today, Jennifer, I'll let you introduce yourself, Jennifer, but Jennifer is an author of a publication, which we will delve into a little bit during today's session. It's available in a digital format, so we can just go to a couple of those screens. And then what we're going to do is a panel discussion. So I'm going to ask Jennifer a few questions, talk about things, and then invite everybody who's here on the meeting. Raise your hand if you have questions, and we'll also kind of try and keep this interactive as well. I think we'll have some questions for you to respond to. So without further ado, Jennifer, I'll hand over to you. If you would like to start off, maybe just a little introduction about yourself, and then not only the Jetliner Cabins publication, but also what drove you to create that in the first place?
Well, first of all, Andrew, thank you very much for this invitation. And aviation is one of my favorite subjects. Yes, I am biased. So for me, this is a great way to spend a Tuesday evening. And I'd like to say hello to everyone who's joining us this evening. And my background, well, I became a member of CILT, way back in the 1980s when I was head of Scotland working for British Airways. And before that, I had been head of West USA, responsible for operations and sales, based in Los Angeles. And my final job at British Airways was controller corporate identity when the airline transitioned from government ownership to investment ownership, privatization. And then I moved on to Pan American World Airways, where I was general manager, product design and development. Now, in all those jobs, I had to write product profiles and instructions for ground handling, airport lounges, city ticket offices, airport exterior, livery schemes, cabin interior, seating schemes. And so I was involved in a lot of practical activities. And what should I say? Oh yes, after Pan Am, I moved to South African Airways and worked there on product design and development. And I was publishing articles in the technical industry magazines. and people were saying, do you know, we don't have a book on cabins. We just, what is it? We've got books on engines, avionics, airframe, oh, all those things, which are pretty important. But as I keep saying, the 5 billion passengers who are traveling on the scheduled airlines this year, they're all sitting in the cabins. Even the engineers sit in the cabins. And so with Wiley & Sons, the publishing company, we brought out the first edition of Jetliner Cabins, hardback, in 2003. And that sold out pretty quickly. So we moved on to a paperback in 2006. And then they wanted to have a revised edition updated. But by that time, you know, we had Kindle books, e-books, and the digital platforms were becoming very active. So in 2013, I was able to bring out the Apple app version, and that was a big jump to digital format. And this year, I've moved on to Kindle, and so 4th edition now of Jetliner Cabins Evolution and Innovation. It's available on Amazon, Apple app, Apple iBooks, and Google. So that's the background of the book. I'm a recovering author now.
No, well, thank you for that, Jennifer. And that evolution actually of publishing is very interesting. I guess one massive advantage you have is, I mean, this isn't an area that stands still. I'm sure there's new things happening all of the time. And it must have been very frustrating when you'd got a printed version of something that you just had to wait for the next big print run. And now I guess you just update dynamically, do you?
Yes. With the 3rd edition, I was able to update, for example, when the Airbus A380 started to fly, and the progression through the Boeing B787, for example, the development of the Embraer 175, 190, and it started out as the CS 1000 in Canada, and that was purchased by Airbus, so it's now the Airbus A220. All those developments, yes, I was able to cover in digital format.
Okay. Well, I have to ask this question. In China, the C919, the new narrow-body jet, which now is kind of in production, full production. Do you have that included in your book yet?
Yes, it's mentioned in one of the case studies. Yes, the C919, and I am keeping an eye on that. I'm also keeping an eye on Boom Supersonic, which appears on the final page of the 4th edition.
Fantastic. Well, listen, I'm just going to share my screen because let everybody kind of see what we're talking about. So this is the publication. I've actually got Kindle open, and I'm fortunate enough to have a copy of the publication. And I just really wanted to put this up to share so people can see kind of the areas that are covered, all the different kind of interior layouts in different business classes. I think things like, dining and all specific kind of airline approaches, whether that's, design, style, from basic through to luxurious. And then this chapter here is, in fact, let me make that a little bit larger, where we kind of just, you focus specifically on upgrades itself. I mean, I don't know, Jennifer, if there's anything you wanted to kind of just pull out of here whilst we've got this open at the moment.
Well, maybe I could mention the Aircraft Interiors Expo in Hamburg at the end of May this year. This is the huge annual meeting on aircraft interiors, and I moderated the session on cabin upgrades, and I used this chapter, my chapter 13, as the basis for the session, and we had 4 hands-on working experts from various major airlines, And then we had an audience and there was question and answer. That was all video recorded, and on the news column of my own website, JETLINERCABINS.com, that video recording is available with very interesting comments from Fly Dubai, from Iberia, from the gentleman who had worked for British Airways, and Soisa in Mexico, a cabin fitting organization. So yes, there is a video recording of 45 minutes with those experts giving us the very latest and greatest information relating to this subject.
That was this year?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, we'll include the link to that when we publish this recording on our YouTube site. So, I mean, we always kind of record our sessions, and this is going to be on the CILT YouTube channel. So we'll put in the notes for that a link to where people can see that interview, or also that panel that you were involved in. So great. I wanted to kind of go down to one area. So I know we're going to talk about the now and the future, but you start off by, I think, a little bit of nostalgia in terms of, I mean, it's fair to say airline travel up until the 70s was a very much exclusive, elite experience, and before kind of more mass travel was made available. And I think a little bit like the railways as well, from my past as well. In those days, it was a very exclusive, luxurious experience to travel in the air. I think this example you've got here from Alaska Airlines, it's unbelievable. This cabin on, what is that? So Convair 880. That's just a single aisle aircraft, isn't it? The Convair.
Yes. So we're looking at vintage images provided by Ron Sattell, the historian of Alaska Airlines. And when the Convair flew, and we're talking about the 70s, the 80s, it started in the 60s. Delta Airlines was the launch carrier for the Convair, I think. And it was amazing because Alaska Airlines was flying over territory where they didn't have roads in those days or rail transport. Everything that they needed, or medication, food, construction supplies, all brought in by air. And if you look at the territory, how many diversion points are there in that area? So Alaska Airlines was of vital importance to the development of that state. And look at the way they handled the interior. A stand-up hotel-style cocktail bar and a beautiful coffee lounge with rear-facing seats, front-facing seats, and side-facing seats. So people could enjoy the view and enjoy their coffee at the same time. It was a wonderful interior, and they called it the Golden Nugget Service. And you can imagine how attractive this would have been in those days. So Alaska Airlines was able to show some local artwork inside the cabin. If you look at the rear-facing front bulkhead, those partitions, you'll see they've got local wildlife portrayed on the vertical surfaces. And they just did a great job. And I thought those pictures were splendid and provided a great contrast alongside the pictures that we have of current aircraft interiors.
Yes, I agree. And we'll come back to the book. Let me just stop the share a second. I just wanted to check. Okay, so we have our first question, and well, we could answer this live. So Zeliko, I will ask the question. If you have a follow-up on this, just raise your hand and I'll open your mic. But the question is, what about the SSJ 100? This is the Sukhoi Superjet for those that don't know. So the Russian aircraft, which did operate in the West, I know Interjet had some of these. I think the question is there anything happening with that plane? And is it something that you've covered as far as looking at airline interiors?
Sorry to say, that one's not in my book, not yet, but I hope to include those new developments at a later stage.
Okay, yeah, and thank you for that question. Yes, from what I know about that aircraft, obviously Interjet first of all grounded their fleet of them, and they were the only Western carrier, and have since gone into bankruptcy as themselves as an airline. I think that jet has challenges because of so many Western parts that it requires, and with the current sanctions on Russia, it's a problematic to keep that in the air. But if anybody else has any other questions, please just either put them in the Q&A in the chat, or just raise your hand, and I'll be able to see that. Okay, so Jennifer, so we talked a little bit about kind of how airline cabins used to be. In terms of today, we know how expensive aircraft are. The maintenance, the running of them also has a cost in itself. So how often do airlines tend to look to change and upgrade their interiors?
Well, typically it would be approximately 7 years, maybe between 5 and 10 years would be normal. And from the very outset, people inside the airline concerned will be looking ahead. But usually when the aircraft is delivered, there'll be a delivery configuration and the design scheme as specified by the airline and as supplied by the OEM, the original manufacturer. Now, we have to remember that a lot of aircraft are in fact leased. The airlines don't own them, and the lease might be for 5 years, or for 2 years, or for 10 years. So the airlines work around those timeframes. There are other reasons for updating, for example, safety regulations. When safety regulations become more defined, the airlines have to move ahead and meet the FAA standards for flammability, fire, smoke, heat release, toxicity. And unlike residential or commercial locations, for aircraft, each item is tested, and the testing isn't just for that item on its own. The item is tested in conjunction with other items on board the aircraft. So those processes have to be worked through before anything can start when it comes to installing the new cabin schemes. And for example, at British Airways, I was responsible for the implementation of the design schemes that were put forward by Landor Associates, a United States very highly regarded design company. But everything had to be tested before we could move ahead. Now, there's another platform, and that is the marketing platform. For example, premium economy class was introduced back in the 1990s. And in those days, we had a few airlines, about at first half a dozen, then it went up to about a dozen, I remember. And now many airlines are moving ahead to install premium economy class because, as they have explained in the Lufthansa reports, this is a moneymaker for them. And return on investment is one of the very, very important keystones when you're looking at an upgrade scheme. And so we have to think about the marketing needs of the airline and the needs and wants and desires of the customer universe. And we're talking about different classes of travel. So airlines are always either busy upgrading, it's the lifeblood, the beating heart of the system, or they're thinking about upgrading. And I need to come to a very important platform, the finance department, because they're always looking for cost savings. And for example, it might be a tiny upgrade like level 1 that I mentioned in chapter 13, because I show the 4 levels from very simple to very complex of upgrading. Let's say an airline moves to headrest covers that can go through 50 laundry cycles or dry cleaning cycles instead of the current ones that can only go through 20 or 30. We're talking about an improvement in durability and longevity. And so we can look at cost savings, and the finance people are very happy. There are new materials that have become available in recent years, much more lightweight and still meeting all the FAA requirements. Now, if the airline moves to a lightweight version, a lighter weight of its current fabric, let's say, the finance people, they've got all their computers and calculators and bean counting machines, we used to say, and they can figure out, ooh, we're saving on weight. That means less jet fuel. That means consequent reduction in carbon emissions and jet fuel savings of XYZ per aircraft, per flight, every day of the year. So they can suddenly give you brownie points, gold stars, because you've moved to a lighter weight fabric for the seat covers and headrest covers that can last 3 times or twice as long as the earlier ones. So all these items have to be taken into account. That's how the system works. And I hope I've explained to you, it's very complicated, at the same time, absolutely essential. And the good airlines are working on upgrades the whole time, one way or another.
Yes, yeah, no, it's fascinating. I mean, you just never think. So it could be regulatory requirements, it could be a kind of marketing and product changes and upgrades, or even, style changes, or it could be the bean counters, they're kind of promoting changes which can really affect the bottom line. Once you multiply each seat by how many there are in an aircraft, and then how many aircraft you've got in a fleet, it's interesting to see. And I know we have a good example of the next question I was going to ask, which was, but how much does this cost and how long does this take? Some airlines literally have many hundred aircraft. I think, is it Southwest have something like 780 something in their fleet? I mean, that is a significant number of interiors to upgrade. I guess 2 points. One is the how long this takes. I mean, but is it a bit like painting the Forth Bridge? By the time you've kind of finished it, the first ones that you did are ready to be upgraded again. And then secondly, kind of, what is kind of the investment that is required to do that? I don't know, is it appropriate now to talk about maybe the Emirates example?
I think that's a good idea, Andrew, because the Emirates example currently operating is the biggest retrofit upgrade program in the history of aviation. And it's $2 billion that they're talking about. And
I'll put that up on the screen so people can see that. Oops, that's probably too much. There you go. Sorry, Jennifer.
Yes. So as you can see, this is a very, very big program, and they mentioned 2 billion. That's when I put this image into the 4th edition on page 161 at the end of chapter 13. And a few months later, they announced that they were adding in another 70 or 80 aircraft into this program. So yes, these programs, we're looking at investments of hundreds of millions of dollars across the business. And we're talking about endless programs of work. Just look at that figure down on the bottom line, 1,000, and it says man hours per day. I think they mean person hours, but they're talking about 16 days to retrofit one aircraft. I can assure you that's a really speedy program. In many cases, the upgrade programs work much more slowly because an airline cannot ground its fleet overnight. The airline has to keep flying the operable units. And so you might have 1 or 2 units in the hangar at the time for retrofit and upgrade. It is something that has to be handled very, very carefully. For example, at the beginning of my chapter 4, Aero Identity, I show the Lufthansa aircraft exteriors, where Lufthansa is currently in the process of removing that lovely yellow sunshine emblem that they had on the tail of the aircraft, the vertical stabilizer. They're taking the yellow away. And so the aircraft is blue and white, but without the yellow disc that we used to see. And the chief executive officer of Lufthansa announced that that program would take 5 years to implement across the fleet. And we're talking about a few hundred aircraft. Lufthansa has more than 700 aircraft, according to the notes I looked at last time I checked. But something like more than 100 of those belong to Swiss. And so on the Lufthansa emblem, we're probably talking maybe around 400 or 500 aircraft. And that's going to take Lufthansa 5 years, they announced. Again, that's pretty good going. I know some identity change schemes that have taken longer than that.
Do you find that airlines will try, and if they are grounding an aircraft for an interior refit, they'll also do exterior work as well, such as the painting?
Yes, it depends on how they organize the work in their hangars, because of course for painting, the aircraft has to go into, well, in British Airways, we used to say the paint shop. And that has to be handled very carefully. These days, the painting schemes are computer controlled. And then there's drying time. And drying time is affected by humidity, air temperature, the type of paint that's being used for various reasons. So yes, they might well do a repaint, and particularly if there's an identity change, they have to factor that in, and it's a good opportunity to handle those tasks when the aircraft is in the hangar for its interior upgrade.
Yeah, I mean, certainly identity is an interesting one. Some of the people on here might know Condor Airlines of Germany, who introduced a very striking kind of
stripes, like those wasp stripes.
Yes, striped planes, and I understand that their entire interior cabin as well has been converted into this stripy pattern. So okay, so I know we have Zeliko, and forgive me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. I'm gonna just tick off your mute. If you have your question to ask, let's see if this will work.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
We can hear you. You're a little bit quiet. If you can get a little louder.
Okay. My question is related to the layout of the airplane cabins, in the sense of how do the airlines calculate how many business class seats they need on the plane versus economy seats? Because sometimes when I see some of the layouts, almost half of the plane is business class. I understand that they're making more money on those business class seats, but then you have to sell them. So is there any kind of, like, how difficult is, like, what kind of research is done to be able to figure out the layout of the plane? And also, do they keep track of the seat occupancy separately for the business class versus the economy class section to kind of come up with the conclusion what works for them better?
That's a very interesting point. And you're asking about the research. The marketing department people are constantly checking on market conditions. Now, it depends on the routes that the aircraft is going to fly on, because there are business hubs, there are leisure center locations. Some aircraft have to fly on lots of different routes, maybe multi-sector routes. So it's a bit like gambling at the casino or gambling at the stock exchange, because the airline has to make those decisions when they specify the delivery configuration that they want to achieve at the time of the aircraft coming off the production line, or when they acquire an aircraft from another source, for example, a leasing corporation. So they have to figure out how many seats to allocate for economy class, how many for business class, and those are hard decisions. And when the cabins are separated using vertical partitions, it's tough to deal with changes. Not impossible, but that's a level 2 or a level 3 retrofit activity. So they have to find out whether their business model, the model that they're using for planning the revenue miles, they have to find out whether that's working properly. And if it doesn't work properly, they're going to have to make changes. And what we're seeing this decade, we're seeing more and more airlines like Emirates, like Air India, putting in what they call premium economy class, which is between basic traditional economy and the business class that you've just mentioned. And then, of course, the airline has to think, well, wait a minute, are we cannibalizing our own business class? Will the business passengers trade down, or will the economy class passengers trade up because they'd like to have legroom of 36, 38 inches like Virgin Atlantic Premium Economy, compared with 31, 32 inches of legroom in basic economy? And so those decisions are monitored the whole time in terms of passenger numbers and the revenue that comes in from the fares that the passengers are paying. And the interesting thing about Lufthansa installing premium economy just recently, and the picture is shown at the beginning of chapter 4, Air Identity, Lufthansa did not put in divider partitions. Lufthansa installed a screen, a bit like a windscreen, above head level, so that the economy class section is close to, immediately behind, the premium economy section. Most airlines have partitions, dividers. The benefit of the Lufthansa situation is that they would be able to make adjustments very, very quickly if needed, depending on how much revenue is in one class or the other class. And I should mention one other item, and that's in my chapter 3, economy class value, where in Europe, we had these convertible seats used by many European airlines, but not used by USA airlines, where the seat could be converted 2 to 3, 3 to 2. And so there would be 3 seats when that row of seats was flying in economy class, with an economy class passenger paying economy class fare. And it can be converted, and I do actually show an example, to 2 seats for passengers paying for short-haul business travel on the European aircraft.
I'll try and show that on the screen, actually. Whereabouts in chapter 3 is that?
It's in chapter 3, fairly near the end. Okay. And the convertible seat. So that was a product that is still operating, and it was sort of quite ingenious at the time. Now, another point is the fixed movable curtain divider. And this is the way the airline can show the difference between economy class and business class, or economy and premium economy, by moving the curtain towards the nose of the aircraft or towards the back of the aircraft. There are fixing positions all the way along. And the air, okay, there we go. With the Lufthansa, can you see those divider screens up at head level?
These here?
Yes, instead of vertical partitions.
So this is this the premium economy, and behind it is the regular economy,
yes.
and that's literally the only demarcation that they have. Premium
economy has 2 + 3 + 2, and economy class will have 4 in the middle, 4 seats.
Okay.
So that's how they handled it. But most airlines have got hard partitions, and that was one of the defining features of the early premium economy class cabins. So I just wanted to mention some aircraft have to fly. Part of the time it's a business heavy flight, and part of the time it's an economy heavy flight. And so this is a big issue, and those convertible seats worked very well, and the fixed movable curtain divider when you're not able to use hard partitions. And all the time, the bean counters have to look at the revenue that's coming in and then give the instructions. We need more economy class seats, or we're going to shrink economy, basic economy class, and we're going to extend premium economy. Here's the research. We need to have this. Could you do it by Monday? Engineering and maintenance will do a thumbs down at that moment, but okay, for the next season or for the new year. So they'll set up targets. I hope that's given some background. Has that given you some information that is of use to you? Please let me know.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that, Jennifer. And we have another hand up, which is Arthur. So Arthur, can you check that we can hear you?
Yes, are you able to hear me?
We are, yes.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Actually, I have 2 questions, Jennifer. When we go back to the Emirates fleet upgrade that you were discussing, significant investment in dollars. And my first question is, how does that translate to a return on investment? They're competitive with other airlines only to an extent. So how do they get their money back for the investment? That's one question. Another question focuses on the US market, and I fly American extensively. And what I've seen, particularly on American, is the current first class on A321s and 737s is pretty much the equivalent of what I recall as coach. So we've lost a lot of amenities, and along with that, I seem to remember a remark by the U.S. Congress that they were going to look at accessibility of lavatories on commercial aircraft. One of the things I've noticed, and I'm not sure that I'm getting that much larger, but it seems like the lavatories are shrinking to the extent that anyone larger than a ballerina would have some difficulty. So 2 questions and 2 different focuses, and thank you.
Gosh, well, you've mentioned a great number of items, and let's start with the final item, lavatories. The normal ratio is, it could be 1 to 50, 1 lavatory to 50 passengers. And you're right, they're becoming smaller, like those telephone booths. At the same time, with the pressure from ADA and accessibility and disabilities in the United States, there is a requirement for 1 lavatory on board an aircraft to be accessible by passengers with special needs. And wheelchair accessibility is being developed. For example, where you've got two, I call them telephone box lavatories, there's a construction now with sliding screens so that the flight attendants can slide the screen and turn the two lavatories into one larger lavatory. And then the wheelchair can get in. And another layout is up at the front of the cabin where they have curtains surrounding the lavatory area so that the helper can help the person in the wheelchair to access the lavatory. And it's true, this situation is something that comes up in customer survey reports the whole time. And thanks to ADA, there's constant pressure, not just in the United States, but in other parts of the world to make the lavatories bigger. And using this screen construction, where the two small ones can be made into one larger lavatory, is going to make a great difference, not just for passengers with special needs who use wheelchairs, and I do cover that subject in depth, by the way, in my chapter 8, but also for passengers in general. I think we are seeing progress. So if I can move on to the return on investment, the ROI, this is a question that I asked the Emirates. He had worked for Emirates for many years, and now he's head of marketing and customer satisfaction for Fly Dubai. And he had handled many of these ginormous schemes. And the lady from Iberia, she had worked for Qatar, which is Airways, which is another very gold standard airline. It's been voted by Skytrax best airline in the world 7 times. There isn't another airline in that category. And what they said was, yes, whenever they went into the offices of the finance department, they were there with their printouts asking for hundreds of millions of dollars. And so the work has to go ahead in advance. And that what they had to do was show that everything was under control, and they were complaining bitterly about supply line problems. But it's the job of the finance department to do the checking to see where the money is coming from, and that the money is coming in once those upgrades and retrofits are up and flying. So of course, there's always a time lag. It'll take at least a year or 2 years before the revenue figures are fully compiled, fully analyzed. And so after 2 or 3 years, there might be a need to enlarge the premium economy class cabin or reduce the size of first class. That's a process that we're seeing in many multi-class airlines, full service airlines now. Instead of having 3 or 4 rows in first class, they've got 1 or 2 rows. And that's because the money simply wasn't coming in, or they had too many upgrades there, passengers who were using their mileage figures in order to sit in first class, but they hadn't paid the full fare. So what we do see is a reduction in the size of the first class cabin on many of the multi-service airlines. We can come back to first class a bit later because on Etihad and Emirates, we are talking about onboard showers. We're talking about floor-to-ceiling doors, privacy doors, with 24/7 butler service, essentially, ambient temperature control, ambient lighting control, huge screens. On Etihad, it's called the Residence. There's a little sitting room, a double bed, a private bathroom with a shower. Absolutely amazing. they are combating private flying, private aviation, charter jets. Will the creme de la creme choose to fly on an airline or pay the money for a private jet? So we do see great development in all classes of travel. And you might ask about economy class. Even here now, at long last, we're seeing some great developments. And I would like to mention Air New Zealand, which I describe at the end of chapter 16, putting in overhead bunk beds in economy class on their Boeing 787 fleet in the middle of the economy class section. And these bunk beds are available for 4 hours at a time, pre-reserved at an extra price point, of course. And research, according to the Air New Zealand reports, research showed that most passengers slept for about 90 minutes at a time. And we're talking about some of the longest sectors, longest stage lengths in the airline business out of New Zealand, obviously, as with Qantas, as with LATAM, very, very long haul airlines. And so they can sell the bunk for 4 hours. If it's a 12-hour flight or 16-hour flight, they would get 3 or 4 passengers. After the 4 hours, the passenger comes out of the bunk and the mattress and bedding and linen all completely changed by the flight attendants. I asked what happens about my cabin baggage. There isn't an overhead stowage bin. And they said, oh yes, well, that'll have to stay in your original overhead stowage bin where you were sitting in the first place. So that's at the end, there we go, at the end of chapter 16. So I just want to encourage everybody to look ahead. There are developments in economy class. And then your other question was about the layout of the narrow-body single-aisle aircraft here in the United States. You mentioned Airbus A321, I think, and you were talking about the business class seats. Could you repeat that question, please, so that we can just hear the details that you were mentioning?
Well, what it seems like is that the current first class, business class seats, both in seat pitch and comfort, are virtually the equivalent of what coach was 20 years ago. It seems like the first class product has been downgraded significantly in terms of comfort. Now, I understand some of that is the economics, they can cram more seats in, but I'm wondering if the airlines are really considering the amount of revenue generated by first class passengers and continuing or focusing on the product rather than just the economy.
Yes, I think here in the United States, we see an approach that's commoditized. It's a bit more utilitarian in a way. They've worked very hard to put in modern style fabrics and furniture and fittings and finishes. And you're right, some of these seats are slimline seats, and they are not as heavily padded as the old style seats that you've mentioned. And with the fire blocking requirements, it used to be necessary to have pretty sort of chunky foams, which are non-biodegradable, I have to say. And the newer style foams, some of them are biodegradable. Some of them have honeycomb structure, and they're much slimmer than those thick foams that I do show in some of my pictures, because there are picture galleries attached to my chapters. The picture galleries contain more than 8,000 images, by the way, going back over the last 3-4 decades. And you can see the difference between those plump, comfy US business class seats, and the new style seats, which are much more sleek is the word that they use, and streamlined, they say. But you're quite right. They are more practical in a utilitarian way. They're easier to clean. They're lighter weight. So we're talking about reduced amount of jet fuel and consequent reduction in carbon emissions. So I think that we have to be practical. This is what the airlines are doing. And we have to think about the names of these cabins. Quite often the name is a bit misleading or a bit cryptic. What is World Traveller? What is what is Comfort Class or Economy Plus, for example? And then we find out, oh, well, it's not very different from basic economy. But that's the way the business goes. And here in the United States, everybody has an amazing opportunity to fly. Airfares have not gone up in real terms in a long, long time. And that's because particularly the US airlines are super practical and super focused on their business models. And that's why we find that some of the business class cabins these days are not as plump and comfortable and equipped the way they used to be. But this is the decision that the airline has to make.
Thank you. I hope that answered your questions, Arthur.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Superb. Thank you. So we probably have time for another couple of questions. If anybody else has one to ask, you either raise your hand or put that into the chat. Jennifer, I have one. So Arthur mentioned about the width reduction that I think we've seen, the more streamlined seats. So I'm quite tall, and the big issue I have with airline interiors is the pitch. So I probably can't get in a seat with less than 30-inch pitch. And I've flown with a lot of mainline carriers. I remember Iberia maybe 20 years ago, and I just couldn't put my legs out. Low-cost carriers, I just don't have a chance of fitting. So whether it's Ryanair or Spirit. My question is not really, I'm not whinging about that. My question is, I'm only 6'2", and I have that problem. That must be a huge amount of the population that just travels so uncomfortably. Do the airlines kind of perceive that as an issue, or is this really kind of being counted as rule and it just goes on the economics?
Well, looking back several years, people were slimmer than they are now, but the height question was always there. And it is true that if we talk about Frontier, for instance, or Spirit, we're talking about economy class pitch of between 28 inches and 31 inches. If we think about Southwest, pitch is 31. That's absolutely typical worldwide, 31, 32. The 28, usually 28-inch pitch was associated with charter carriers and holidaymakers who were going to be on the aircraft for maybe 1 or 2 hours, going to Florida from Northeast, or going to Malaga from Britain, for example. And anything's okay. Even I feel like a pretzel. I'm 5'9½", so yes, I'm pretty critical. And I really dislike being cramped up. But if it's an hour or two, it's a bit like being at the cinema or in a sports stadium or a bus. But when you're on a flight of more than 3 hours or 4 hours, this can be really horrible because your legs can go to sleep, or you can get cramps. You don't feel right when you arrive. So what we're seeing now is these stretch seats introduced by Frontier, for instance, where they've got 36 or 37-inch pitch or 38. And Spirit has got 8 big front seats up in the front, and they're talking there about 36-inch pitch, but no recline. And the tendency now is for these all economy class carriers to put in some stretch style or large seats, sometimes at the back of the aircraft. I noticed some of the Asian airlines were doing that. And as I mentioned, Spirit and Frontier near the front. And then you've got the emergency exit rows. So for all of us who are tall, we should try to reserve a seat near the emergency exit. And that way we know we've got plenty of legroom. But then sometimes we don't have a seat row in front of us where we can put our briefcase or our carry-on cabin.
Yes.
So that's the downside. Now, when we see the the leading airlines developing premium economy class, usually we're talking about 36, 38-inch pitch. And I would like to remind everyone that Concorde had 37, 38-inch pitch. And the seats on Concorde here in New York City, we can all go to the Intrepid and walk along the Concorde aisle. Alpha Delta is sitting there. Seats are 17 inches wide, and the window, I show this in my picture galleries, the window pane is the size of a hand span, about the size of stretching an octave on the piano vertically, 6.5 inches tall and 4.5 inches wide. But those seats were very comfortable, beautifully upholstered, and at British Airways, I can tell you, because I looked after the supersonic fleet myself for 2 years. I also looked after the implementation of the schemes for the subsonic fleet. We didn't get complaints about the seat width or the pitch. And most of those passengers were, well, they were adult to start with. They were mainly North American, transatlantic, traveling business people, middle age. And we weren't talking about Japanese youngsters or students aged, 13 and a half or 14, who have no problems in economy class whatsoever. And so there are ways of upholstering the seats. And this comes back to the earlier question about seat comfort. And I think that the premium economy class is going to solve a lot of problems for people. But the weight issue has been referred to FAA, and there are lobby groups asking for fresh metrics now for seating on board aircraft, because just in demographic terms, adults are bigger and heavier than they were 40, 50 years ago. And many of these measurements that you've described do date back 40 or 50 years.
Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer. So, listen, I did invite another question, and Zeliko, I'm going to unmute you. We really are coming up to the top of the hour, but if you are able to ask your questions, Zeliko, and then we can quickly cover that.
Yeah, okay, I'll be quick. Is there anything changing in the design of the overhead bins since the airline started charging for the checked luggage? It was just natural reaction of the passengers to carry more with the carry-on luggage. Now we are often asked to check carry-on luggage and sometimes even forced by the airlines to check our carry-on luggage. So is the overhead bins are going to be redesigned to have more space for the carry-on luggage, or that's not changing?
Yes, and this is something that customers really want to see. And so the overhead bins have been redesigned on many aircraft types. I do show examples in my book. And now the bins are big enough and they swivel so they can be operated by a passenger with one hand. And they're constructed to carry the weight of suitcases that are stacked on their small measurement on their side. Instead of the suitcase going in flat with its handle facing the passenger who's putting the suitcase into the bin, the suitcase goes in on its side, and I do show pictures of these bins, and that means you could get maybe 6 into a bin or 5 instead of just 3 lying flat. Now, it isn't just a question of space and that tipping swivel so that the curve of the aircraft, the upper section of the fuselage, is being used for the storage of this overhead, of the suitcases in the overhead bin. It's also the weight that the bin carries. And so that's something that's taking place on all new aircraft. Even Concorde had to have larger bins installed, and I do show that in the Concorde case study. And the original bins held they used to say a business style bowler hat and a business style briefcase. But in the later years of Concorde, which flew for 27 years, they installed overhead bins that would take laptop computers and chunky briefcases. So this is something that has become very, very important over the last couple of decades, because passengers want to carry their bags with them inside the aircraft. And airlines are always trying to generate ancillary revenue, and charging passengers to check the luggage, to put it into the hold, is something that they're able to use as a platform for gaining more revenue, at the same time providing more space in the overhead bins for passengers to use when they bring their carry-on. Now, carry-on luggage used to be something pretty small at one time. You see ladies arriving with their handbags and gentlemen with their rather classy looking briefcases. But nowadays it's a rollerboard, and they've got enough in there for 2 weeks in Florida or 3 weeks, you know, on the Mediterranean. And so those bins are getting bigger, and it is a construction process that is, it's probably it's a level 4 in my book. It's a complicated construction process. They can't just put the aircraft into the hangar overnight and come out with bigger bins. That's a much, much bigger job for everyone.
Yes, I can imagine. So, Jennifer, we've had you speaking for almost an hour and 5 minutes. Absolutely fascinating insights you've given us into this area. We'll have to do this again and cover all the other topics that we didn't get to cover as well. But for now, thank you so much indeed for your time and answering our questions. As I mentioned at the start, we have recorded this, and it is going to be available on the CILT YouTube channel. So we'll share that link with everybody that's registered. So if you have people that you know that would have enjoyed this, please recommend that they go and have a look at that. I'll also put a link to Jennifer's session that you had at the Hamburg kind of Interiors Expo earlier this year, people can watch that as well. So Jennifer, thank you very much on behalf of CILT, everybody that's attended today. That was really a terrific presentation and discussion.
Oh, well, Andrew, thank you. And thank you to everyone who has joined us this evening. It's a pleasure to spend time with you like this. And I want to thank CILT and CILTNA North America for professional support. You've been wonderful over sending out the information about jetliner cabins. And for anyone who is reading Jetliner Cabins, Evolution and Innovation, if you've got any questions, here I am in the middle of Manhattan. I'm not running away. And it's been a great way to spend a Tuesday with you. I've really enjoyed this session. So please let me know if there are any more questions that you have for me. And once again, Andrew, thank you very, very much for your leadership.
Okay, you're more than welcome. And I will wish everybody a pleasant evening, and we'll see you at the next one next month. So goodbye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.